An innocent black teen is sentenced to death, her hands shaking, her voice silenced in a courtroom that never gave her a chance. The judge bangs the gavel, sealing her fate, until the doors swing open. And the man who walks in isn't just any man. He's the United States Attorney General, her father. But she never knew him, and he had no idea she even existed. So why was her trial kept secret? Who wanted her gone so badly they buried the truth? And what happens when the man in charge of justice realizes he's part of the system that tried to kill his own daughter? This is a story of power, betrayal, and a bond that defies bloodlines, and the truth waiting to explode behind closed doors. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The fluorescent lights of Joey's diner buzzed overhead as Naomi Daniels wiped down the last table of her shift. The Friday night crowd had thinned out, leaving behind sticky maple syrup residue and scattered crumbs. Her feet ached in her non-slip shoes and the smell of French fries clung to her black uniform. The bell above the door chimed as the last customers left, an elderly couple who had left her a decent tip. Naomi managed a small smile as she tucked the money into her apron pocket. Every dollar counted toward her college fund, even if she wasn't sure where she'd end up yet. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Naomi pulled it out, seeing a text from her best friend, Maya. "Lake house party tonight, Tyler Green's place. Everyone's going. Please come. I need my wing woman." Naomi's stomach tightened. Tyler Green's parties were legendary at their school, but she'd never been to one. His father was some big shot in local politics, and Tyler never let anyone forget it. She typed back, "IDK got a lot of college stuff to sort through." Maya's response was instant. "Come on. One night of fun before we stress about acceptance letters. I'll pick you up in 30. No excuses." Naomi sighed, looking at her reflection in the chrome paper towel dispenser. Her dark curls had fallen loose from her work ponytail, and she looked tired. Maybe Maya was right. She had been doing nothing but working and studying lately. "Hey, Joey," she called to her boss, who was counting the register. "I'm done with my section. Okay if I head out?" The older man nodded without looking up. "See you Sunday, kid." 20 minutes later, Naomi was home changing out of her uniform. She pulled on her favorite jeans and a soft blue sweater, trying to quiet the nervous flutter in her chest. Her mom was working the night shift at the hospital, so she left a note on the fridge. "At Maya's, home by midnight, love you." Maya's beat-up Honda pulled up outside, hip-hop music thumping through the open windows. "Get in, gorgeous," she called out. "Tonight's gonna be epic." The lake house was lit up like a Christmas tree when they arrived, cars parked all along the winding driveway. Bass-heavy music pulsed from inside. Maya practically bounced with excitement as they walked up to the door. A guy Naomi recognized from her chemistry class was collecting phones at the entrance. "House rules," he said with a shrug. "No social media evidence of underage fun." Naomi hesitated, but Maya had already dropped her phone in the basket. "It's fine," Maya assured her. "Everyone does it." Inside, the party was in full swing. Clusters of their classmates filled every room, red cups in hand, laughing and dancing. The lake was visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, moonlight sparkling on the dark water. Despite the spring chill, some people were already in the hot tub on the deck. "I'm getting drinks," Maya announced, disappearing into the crowd. Naomi hung back, taking in the scene. The house was massive, all gleaming hardwood and expensive furniture. Family photos lined the walls. Tyler and his father at golf courses, on boats, at political events. They were always smiling those perfect camera-ready smiles. Maya returned with 2 cups. "Here's to surviving senior year," she said, clinking their drinks together. The punch was sweet but strong. Naomi sipped it slowly, letting Maya pull her into conversations with their classmates. Everyone was talking about college plans, spring break stories, graduation parties. For a while, it felt almost normal, just another high school party. But as the night wore on, Naomi noticed the crowd getting rowdier. Someone had turned the music up even louder, and there were definitely more empty bottles than before. Maya was deep in conversation with her crush from the soccer team. "I'm going to find the bathroom," Naomi told her, but Maya just waved distractedly. The upstairs hallway was quieter, the music muffled. Naomi tried a few doors, a bedroom, a linen closet, finally the bathroom. As she washed her hands, she studied herself in the mirror. Her cheeks were flushed from the punch and her curls had gone wild in the humid house. When she opened the door, Tyler Green was leaning against the wall waiting. "Having fun?" he asked, his words slightly slurred. He was tall, dressed in an expensive-looking button-down shirt, his blonde hair perfectly styled. "Yeah, thanks," Naomi said politely, trying to step around him. "Nice house." Tyler moved to block her path. "You know, I've noticed you at school. You're different from the other girls. Smarter." He stepped closer, and Naomi could smell the alcohol on his breath. "More interesting." "I should get back to my friend," Naomi said, her heart beginning to race. But Tyler put his hand on the wall beside her head, boxing her in. "Come on, stay and talk," he insisted. His other hand reached for her waist. "We could go to my room." "No thanks." Naomi ducked under his arm, walking quickly down the hall. She heard his footsteps behind her and darted into what looked like a home office, hoping to loop around to the stairs. But Tyler followed her in, closing the door behind him. "Don't be like that," he said, his friendly tone turning sharp. "I'm trying to pay you a compliment." "I want to leave," Naomi said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. The desk was between them now, a heavy wooden thing covered in papers and framed photos. Tyler's face hardened. "Nobody says no to me," he growled, lunging forward to grab her arm. Naomi's hand found something on the desk. A letter opener, silver and sharp. Without thinking, she swung it forward as Tyler reached for her. There was a horrible moment of silence. Tyler looked down at his stomach where the letter opener stuck out from his shirt. A red stain began to spread across the white fabric. "What?" he gasped, stumbling backward. He hit the door and slid down it, eyes wide with shock. The sound of his body hitting the floor must have carried because suddenly there were footsteps pounding up the stairs. The door burst open and people spilled in. Someone screamed, "Oh my God, someone call 911. Tyler, can you hear me? What did you do to him?" Naomi stood frozen, staring at her hands. They were red with blood. The room spun around her as people shouted and pushed past. Through the chaos, she heard sirens in the distance. The police arrived in a blur of lights and radios. Rough hands pulled her arms behind her back, cold metal handcuffs clicking into place. An officer's voice droned something about rights and remaining silent, but the words were fuzzy, far away. They led her outside to the waiting police car. As they pushed her head down into the back seat, Naomi caught one last glimpse of the lake house through the window. It blazed with light, emergency vehicles casting red and blue shadows across the manicured lawn. Then the door slammed shut, and she watched it all recede into the darkness as the car pulled away. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Naomi jerked awake, her neck stiff from sleeping hunched over a metal table. The interview room was small and windowless, with pale gray walls and a single mirror she knew others could see through. Her mouth felt dry, and her wrists were raw from the handcuffs they'd finally removed. She had no idea what time it was. Her clothes still carried the smell of the party, and dried blood flaked from her hands. No one had let her clean up. The door opened with a harsh click. A white detective in his 50s walked in, his shirt sleeves rolled up and a coffee cup in his hand. He didn't offer her any water. "I'm Detective Harlan," he said, dropping a thick file on the table. "Let's talk about what happened last night." Naomi sat up straighter, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'd like to call my mother." Harlan ignored her request, flipping open the file. "You were at Tyler Green's house. Things got out of hand. Why don't you tell me what led up to the incident?" "I want to speak to my mom," Naomi repeated. "Or a lawyer." The detective's friendly demeanor slipped slightly. "You're becoming agitated. We're just having a conversation here. I'm trying to help you sort this out." "I'm not agitated," Naomi said quietly. "I'm very calm. But I know my rights." Harlan leaned forward, his coffee breath hot in her face. "Listen, young lady. Tyler Green is in critical condition. His father is a prominent member of this community. The sooner you cooperate, the better this will go for you." Naomi folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I understand, but I'd still like to speak to my mother or a lawyer first." "Non-cooperative," Harlan muttered, writing something in his notepad. "Defensive attitude." He pulled out a form and slid it across the table. "Look, we can help you if you just admit it was an accident. Sign this statement and we can start working this out." Naomi glanced at the dense paragraphs of text but didn't touch the paper. "I can't read or sign anything without a lawyer present?" The detective's face hardened. "You're making this much harder than it needs to be." He gathered his files and stood up. "Maybe some time in holding will help you think more clearly about cooperating." Two officers led her down a long hallway to a holding cell. The concrete bench was cold through her jeans as she sat down, wrapping her arms around herself. Across town, Lisa Daniels paced her kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. She'd woken up to find Naomi's note about going to Maya's, but her daughter hadn't come home. None of her calls were going through. "Please," she said to the 4th police dispatcher she'd spoken to. "I just need to know if my daughter was brought in last night. Her name is Naomi Daniels." "Ma'am, we can't release that information over the phone," the dispatcher said flatly. "I'm her mother," Lisa's voice cracked. "She's 18, but she's still in high school. She's never been in trouble before. Please." "If your daughter has been arrested, she'll be allowed to make a phone call." "But she hasn't called," Lisa said. "Something must be wrong. Can you at least tell me if she's okay?" "I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't help you." The line went dead. Lisa sank into a kitchen chair, her hands shaking as she tried Maya's number again. No answer. She pulled up the local news on her phone, scrolling frantically. Her heart stopped when she saw the headline, "Son of City Councilman critically injured at party." The holding cell was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Naomi had no way to track time, but her stomach told her it must be morning. She dozed off briefly on the hard bench when footsteps approached. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit appeared at the bars. His tie was loose, and he carried a battered briefcase. "Naomi Daniels?" he asked, consulting a stack of papers. "I'm Mr. Keyes, your public defender. They just assigned me your case this morning." Naomi stood up quickly. "Can you help me contact my mother?" Keyes ran a hand through his thinning hair. "We'll get to that. First, we need to discuss your situation. Things don't look good." "What do you mean?" Naomi asked, her throat tightening. The lawyer's tired eyes met hers. "Tyler Green died an hour ago. The charges are being upgraded to murder." The word hit Naomi like a physical blow. She sank back onto the bench, the room spinning around her. Murder. The letter opener. Tyler's shocked face. The blood on her hands. "I was defending myself," she whispered. Keyes shuffled through his papers. "We'll explore that angle, but it's complicated. The witness statements, well, let's just say they paint a different picture. And with no phones allowed at the party, there's no video evidence to support your version." Naomi stared at the blank wall across from her cell, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She was alone. No phone, no mother, no real lawyer. And now, Tyler was dead. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked, her voice small in the empty corridor. "There will be an arraignment later today," Keyes said, already gathering his things. "Don't say anything else to anyone. I'll try to reach your mother before then, but I have 4 other cases this morning." He hesitated. "Try to stay calm. This is just the beginning of a long process." Naomi watched him hurry away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. She pressed her palms against the cold concrete wall, trying to ground herself in the rough texture. The word murder seemed to pulse in her mind with each heartbeat, growing heavier and more real with each passing moment. Lisa's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, weaving through morning traffic toward the county jail. After dozens of calls, she'd finally reached someone who confirmed Naomi was there. Her daughter had been alone all night, probably terrified, while Lisa had been helplessly dialing numbers. The parking lot was nearly empty when she pulled in. The concrete building loomed gray and imposing against the cloudy sky. Lisa grabbed her purse and practically ran to the entrance, her heels clicking on the pavement. Inside, the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. A bored-looking clerk sat behind thick glass at the front desk. "I'm here to see my daughter, Naomi Daniels," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "She was brought in last night, and no one notified me." The clerk typed something into her computer, frowning slightly. "Daniels, yes, she's already been processed and arraigned this morning." "What?" Lisa's hand gripped the counter. "That's impossible. I'm her mother. I wasn't notified. She's barely 18. She's still in high school." "Let me check." More typing. "Oh, looks like there was a clerical error in the notification system. These things happen sometimes." "These things happen?" Lisa's voice rose. "My daughter was arrested, questioned without a parent present, and arraigned without representation of her choice. That's not just a clerical error." A security guard shifted closer to the desk, and the clerk's expression hardened. "Ma'am, if you can't maintain a calm demeanor, I'll have to ask you to leave." Lisa took a deep breath, her nails digging into her palms. "I want to see my daughter. Now. Visiting hours aren't until tomorrow. You can fill out this form to schedule a time." Lisa spent the next hours in a frenzy of calls. She contacted every local news station, but each response was the same. They were following the Green family's statement that this was a tragic incident of youth violence. No one seemed interested in Naomi's side of the story. She called civil rights organizations, leaving desperate voicemails. She reached out to lawyers, but their fees were impossible on her teaching assistant's salary. Each dead end felt like another brick in the wall being built around her daughter. Meanwhile, Naomi was led through echoing corridors to a new cell in the juvenile wing. The guard said it was for her own safety, but the isolation felt suffocating. The small window in her cell showed only a slice of sky. Mr. Keyes appeared late in the afternoon, his tie even more crooked than before. "There have been some developments," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "The judge has ordered the trial closed to the public. Standard procedure for juvenile cases, they say, even though you're technically an adult. There's also a media blackout in place." "But I'm not a juvenile," Naomi said. "And what about my mom? Has anyone told her where I am?" "Your mother's been notified now." Keyes shuffled through his ever-present stack of papers. "But with the closed proceedings, attendance will be strictly limited. It's supposedly for your protection, given the sensitive nature of the case." Naomi wrapped her arms around herself, the orange jumpsuit rough against her skin. "Protection from what? The truth?" Keyes just sighed and checked his watch. "The preliminary hearing is in 20 minutes. Remember what we discussed? Let me do the talking." The courtroom was smaller than Naomi expected, with dark wood panels and fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly green. Judge Albert Monroe sat high on his bench, peering down through wire-rimmed glasses. His face might have been carved from stone. Naomi's hands were cuffed in front of her as she sat beside Mr. Keyes. The prosecutor's table was full of well-dressed attorneys with matching leather briefcases. The gallery behind them was empty. No press, no public, no mom. "Case number 47,293, State v. Daniels," the clerk announced. "Preliminary hearing to review evidence and determine bail." Judge Monroe barely glanced at the papers before him. "Prosecution may proceed." The lead prosecutor stood, his suit perfectly pressed. "Your Honor, the defendant displayed extreme violent tendencies, resulting in the death of Tyler Green. The attack was unprovoked, using a weapon of opportunity in what appears to be a dramatic overreaction to normal teenage social interaction." Naomi's chest tightened. Normal social interaction? She could still feel Tyler's hands gripping her arms, still smell the alcohol on his breath as he blocked the door. Keyes stood up, clutching a single sheet of paper. "Your Honor, my client acted in self-defense. There were clear signs of—" "The evidence shows premeditation," the prosecutor interrupted. "The defendant armed herself with a letter opener before any alleged confrontation. Given the violent nature of the crime and the defendant's apparent lack of remorse, we request bail be denied." Judge Monroe's expression hadn't changed once during the entire exchange. "Does the defense have anything substantive to add?" Keyes fumbled with his paper. Yes, Your Honor, my client has no prior record, is a senior honors student, and has strong community ties. She poses no flight risk. Additionally, there are documented injuries from the night in question that support. The injuries are not relevant at this stage, Judge Monroe cut in. His voice was as cold and smooth as marble. This hearing is to determine bail only. Given the severity of the charges and the violent nature of the crime, bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody pending trial. But, Your Honor, Keyes started, that will be all. Judge Monroe's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Defendant is remanded to custody. Next case. The handcuffs bit into Naomi's wrists as the guard pulled her to her feet. She turned, desperately scanning the empty gallery one last time. The rows of wooden benches stared back, silent and accusing. No mother's encouraging smile, no friendly faces, no one to witness what was happening. As they led her back toward her cell, Naomi caught a glimpse of her reflection in a window. The orange jumpsuit made her look like a stranger to herself. Behind her, she could hear the normal bustle of the courthouse resuming, the world moving on as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just disappeared behind closed doors, her voice muffled, her story already decided. Lisa sat in her parked car outside the courthouse, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles had turned white. The morning sun beat down through the windshield, but she felt cold inside. The courthouse's stone facade loomed before her, its windows reflecting light like empty eyes. She fumbled for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found her sister Rachel's number. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Lisa, what's wrong? Everything, Lisa's voice cracked. They won't let me see her, Rachel. They won't even let me in the courtroom. How can they do that? She's my daughter. Slow down, Rachel said. Start from the beginning. Lisa took a shaky breath, closing her eyes. Naomi was arrested Friday night. I wasn't notified until this morning, and by then they'd already arraigned her. Now they're saying the trial will be closed. There's some kind of media blackout, and I can't even get basic information about what's happening to my own child. That doesn't sound right, Rachel said. Have you contacted a lawyer? I've called everyone I can think of. No one will take the case without a massive retainer, and the public defender they assigned her. Lisa trailed off, remembering Mr. Keyes' wrinkled suit and distracted manner. He barely seems to know what day it is. Hold on, Rachel said. There was the sound of papers shuffling. I know someone, a civil rights attorney in Riverside County. She handles cases like this all the time. Hope flickered in Lisa's chest. Can you send me her number? 20 minutes later, that hope dimmed as Lisa listened to the attorney explain the situation. I'm sorry, Ms. Daniels, but if the case has been sealed, there's nothing I can do right now. We can't even review the basic documents until the seal is lifted. But when will that be? It could be weeks, sometimes months. The attorney's voice was sympathetic but firm. Keep documenting everything, every phone call, every interaction. We'll need it later. Meanwhile, in the juvenile wing of the county jail, a guard led Naomi to her assigned cell. It was small, maybe 8 feet by 10, with concrete walls painted an institutional beige. 2 metal bunks were bolted to the wall, and a stainless steel toilet sat in the corner with a half wall for minimal privacy. A girl about Naomi's age lay on the bottom bunk facing the wall. She didn't move when Naomi entered. Hi, Naomi said softly. No response. She climbed onto the top bunk, the thin mattress crinkling under her weight. The ceiling was so close she could touch it if she reached up. She tried to focus on breathing slowly, steadily, like she did before dance performances or big tests. But this wasn't a performance she could prepare for. Hours passed like molasses. Naomi's cellmate got up once to use the bathroom but didn't speak or make eye contact. At lunch, they were led to a small common area where other girls sat at metal tables, picking at bland food. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a constant reminder of where she was. Back in the cell, Naomi asked for paper and a pencil. The guard brought them after what felt like forever. She sat cross-legged on her bunk and began to write. Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll get this letter. I don't even know if they'll let me send it, but I need to write to you anyway. I'm scared. Everything happened so fast, and now it feels like I'm trapped in some kind of nightmare. They keep calling me violent and dangerous, but they won't listen to what really happened. I miss you so much. Please don't give up on me. Love, Naomi." She folded the paper carefully and gave it to a guard, who took it without comment. Would it make it to her mother? Or would it disappear into some file, another piece of her voice silenced? That evening, her cellmate finally spoke. "First night's the hardest," she whispered, still facing the wall. "Try to sleep if you can." But sleep felt impossible. Naomi's mind kept racing, thinking about everything she was missing. Her AP exams were coming up. College decisions would be arriving soon. Would any of that matter now? Her fears weren't unfounded. At Riverside High School, Principal Matthews was already taking action. He stood in the front office, watching as a maintenance worker carefully removed Naomi's name from the honor roll plaque hanging in the main hallway. "It's just pending investigation," he told his secretary, who had been watching with a troubled expression. "Standard procedure." Online, the situation was worse. Messages flooded social media, each version of events more dramatic than the last. She was jealous because Tyler liked someone else. "I heard she brought the knife from home." Always knew there was something off about her. Maya tried defending her friend, but her comments were quickly buried under an avalanche of accusations and speculation. The truth didn't matter anymore. The story had already been written. Lisa sat at her kitchen table that evening, staring at the official document that had arrived by courier. The indictment was typed in cold, formal language, laying out charges that made her daughter sound like a hardened criminal. But what caught her eye was the name at the top: State of California versus Naomi Talcott Daniels. Her hands began to shake. Talcott. She hadn't seen that name in almost 19 years. She'd been so careful, had gone through every legal channel to keep it off Naomi's records. It shouldn't be there. It couldn't be there by accident. Lisa stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. She walked to her bedroom closet and reached for the highest shelf, where a dusty cardboard box sat untouched for nearly 2 decades. The label, written in her neat handwriting from another lifetime, read, "Law School James." Lisa perched on the edge of her bed, the weight of 2 objects heavy in her hands. The indictment paper crinkled slightly in her right hand, while the cardboard box labeled Law School James sat like a time bomb in her left. Dust motes danced in the evening light filtering through her bedroom window as she stared at the box she'd kept hidden away for nearly 2 decades. With trembling fingers, she set down the indictment and lifted the box lid. The musty smell of old paper and forgotten memories wafted up. On top lay her constitutional law textbook, its pages yellow with age. She moved it aside, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Beneath the letters, partially hidden by a folder of class notes, was the photo. Lisa's breath caught as she pulled it out. The edges were worn, but the image remained clear. A younger version of herself standing next to James Talcott on the law school's stone steps. His hand rested on her shoulder, confident and proprietary. They both wore broad smiles, their faces bright with ambition and promise. She was wearing her favorite green sweater, and James had on one of his perfectly pressed button-down shirts. They looked like the perfect law school couple. Lisa closed her eyes, memories washing over her like a tide. Spring semester of their final year. The late nights in the library had turned into shared cups of coffee, which became dinner dates, which became something more. James had just secured a prestigious federal clerkship, a stepping stone to the career in justice reform he'd always talked about. He'd been brilliant, passionate about changing the system from within. She remembered the exact moment she'd told him about the pregnancy. It was 2 weeks before graduation, in the small coffee shop just off campus where they usually studied. The place had been nearly empty, just a barista wiping down tables and one elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner. "I'm pregnant," she'd said, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she couldn't drink. James had gone very still, his face a mask of careful control. "Are you sure?" "Yes. How long have you known?" "A few weeks. I wanted to be certain before I told you." He'd looked out the window for a long moment, watching students hurry past on their way to final exams. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, deliberate. "This isn't a good time, Lisa. My clerkship starts in 2 months. I'm on track for a position with the DOJ after that. We need to think about this carefully. But there had been no we after that conversation. Within days, James had stopped returning her calls. By graduation, he was gone, moved early to Washington, D.C., she later learned. She'd made her choice then, erasing him from her life as thoroughly as he'd erased her from his. Lisa set the photo aside and pulled out more papers from the box. Her fingers found a newspaper clipping from a few years ago. James Talcott being sworn in as a federal judge. His face was older, but still handsome, still wearing that same expression of careful control. She had never put his name on Naomi's birth certificate. It had been a conscious decision, one made to protect both herself and her daughter from the complications of James's growing political career. She'd used her maiden name, Daniels, and left the father's information blank. The records had been sealed at her request, an extra layer of protection she'd insisted on. So how had Talcott appeared on Naomi's indictment? Lisa reached for her phone and dialed the courthouse number she'd already memorized over the past few days. After several transfers and holds, she finally reached someone in records. Records Department, this is Carol speaking. Hi Carol, this is Lisa Daniels. I'm calling about some paperwork filed for Naomi Daniels, case number JV 2023-1142. One moment. The sound of typing filled the line. Yes, I have that file here. What's your question? Lisa took a deep breath. There seems to be an error in my daughter's name on the indictment. It lists her as Naomi Talcott Daniels, but that's not her legal name. Let me check something. More typing. No, that appears to be correct according to our system. All birth name records were verified through federal systems as part of standard booking procedure. The phone nearly slipped from Lisa's grip. Federal systems. Someone had accessed Naomi's sealed birth records, records that could only be unsealed with high-level authorization. Someone who knew exactly who James Talcott was and where to look. Ma'am? Carol's voice came through the phone. Are you still there? Lisa's throat felt dry. Yes, I'm here. Thank you for checking. She ended the call and let the phone fall onto the bed beside her. The pieces were starting to form a picture she didn't want to see. The rushed arraignment, the closed courtroom, the media blackout, the sudden appearance of James's name on official documents. None of it was accidental. She looked down at the photo again, at James's hand resting possessively on her shoulder, at his confident smile. He'd always been 10 steps ahead, always calculating the next move. Now, nearly 19 years later, that same calculating precision was at work again. But this time, it was Naomi caught in its machinery. Naomi sat alone at the metal table in the juvenile facility's common area, pushing soggy corn around her plastic tray with a dull spork. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the institutional green walls. Her orange jumpsuit felt scratchy against her skin, a constant reminder of where she was. The food had no taste anymore. Everything was bland, like her mind was refusing to process even basic sensations. She lifted a spoonful of corn, watched it drop back to the tray with a wet plop. Hey, you gonna eat that? Naomi looked up to see another girl hovering near her table. The girl was small, with dark circles under her eyes and fidgety hands. Her name tag read, Martinez, C. No, Naomi said quietly, sliding the tray forward a few inches. You can have it. Martinez hesitated, then sat down across from her. I'm Carla. You're the new girl, right? The one from the lake house? Naomi's shoulders tensed. She kept her eyes down, focusing on a scratch in the metal table surface. 2 guards shifted position along the wall, their radios crackling with static. They always seemed to pay extra attention when anyone approached her table. I don't talk about it, Naomi said. Sorry, Carla mumbled, scooping up some of the corn. Just trying to be friendly. It gets lonely in here. The TV mounted high on the wall flickered with snow-like static where the news channels should be. Naomi had noticed they were always blocked now. Even the Weather Channel cut out sometimes. The only things that came through clearly were old sitcom reruns and cartoons. A guard's radio crackled louder. Daniel's visitor. Naomi stood up slowly, careful to keep her movements measured and calm. She'd learned quickly that any sudden motion drew immediate attention. As she walked toward the visitor area, she could feel the guard's eyes following her every step. The visiting room was small and stark, with a scratched plastic divider between inmates and visitors. Mr. Keyes already sat on the other side, his tie loosened and his hair more disheveled than usual. Dark patches of sweat showed under his arms despite the room's chill. "Naomi," he said as she sat down. His voice crackled through the old speaker system. "We need to talk about some developments in your case." She noticed he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Her stomach clenched. "The prosecution—" He paused, shuffling papers. "They're pushing for capital punishment." The words didn't make sense at first. They floated in the air like alien symbols. "Death penalty?" Naomi's voice came out barely above a whisper. "But I didn't even run. When it happened, I called for help. I stayed right there." Mr. Keyes ran a hand through his thinning hair. "They're building it as premeditated because of the letter opener. They're saying you positioned yourself near the desk deliberately, that you knew the weapon was there." "That's not true." Naomi's hands gripped the edge of the counter. "I was trapped. He wouldn't let me leave. I just reached behind me and grabbed whatever was there." I know, Mr. Keyes sighed. "But here's something else strange. There's no digital evidence in the case file. No texts from that night, no phone calls, no videos. Nothing from anyone's phones at all." Naomi frowned. "But everyone had their phones taken at the door. There must have been dozens of them." "Exactly. And yet somehow not a single piece of digital evidence was submitted. It's like the entire scene was scrubbed clean." He tapped his pen against his legal pad. "Even the 911 call is missing from the record." Back at home, Lisa sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by stacks of legal documents. Her eyes burned from hours of reading fine print, looking for anything that might help make sense of what was happening. She picked up the initial police report again, comparing it to the booking documents. The timestamps didn't match. There was a 40-minute gap that couldn't be explained. She grabbed the preliminary hearing transcript, noticing for the first time that the page numbers jumped from 23 to 25. A whole page was missing. The arraignment documents were in PDF format, but the indictment was a scanned JPEG. Different file formats for standard court documents. Why? She'd been too shocked by seeing James's name to notice these details before. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, an old friend from her activism days who now worked as a civil rights attorney in Chicago. "Can talk now. Secure line only." Lisa's hands shook slightly as she dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. "Lisa?" Marcus's voice was low, urgent. "I've been making calls about Naomi's case. Something's not right." "I know," Lisa said. "I'm looking at the documents now. There are inconsistencies everywhere." "It's bigger than that." Marcus paused and she could hear him moving, probably finding a private space to talk. "I checked the federal database, the one that tracks all juvenile capital cases. Lisa, your daughter's trial isn't there." "What do you mean it's not there?" "It has to be. It's gone or it was never entered. The only way that happens is if someone wants it buried." His voice dropped even lower. "Someone with serious authority flagged this case. They're trying to make it disappear." Lisa looked down at the photo of James still sitting on top of the box beside her. His confident smile seemed to mock her now, reminding her of all the power he'd accumulated over the years. "Marcus," she said, "I need to tell you something about Naomi's father." The rain drummed against the courthouse windows, creating a somber rhythm that matched Naomi's shuffling steps. Her orange jumpsuit was stark against the dark wood paneling, as two guards led her through the back entrance, the chains between her wrists clinking with each movement. Water dripped from the ceiling near a crack in the corner, the steady plink-plink echoing through the empty hallway. Outside, Lisa stood in the downpour, her umbrella forgotten at her side. She watched helplessly as another officer blocked her path to the entrance. "Ma'am, this is a closed proceeding. No public access allowed." "That's my daughter," Lisa's voice cracked. "She's 18, she needs her mother." The officer's face remained impassive. "Those are the judge's orders, ma'am." Please step back." Inside the courtroom, Naomi's wet shoes squeaked against the polished floor as she was guided to her seat. The room felt cavernous with so few people present. Just Judge Monroe perched high on his bench, the stern-faced prosecutor arranging papers at his table, the ever-present bailiff, and Mr. Keyes, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Judge Monroe's face as he adjusted his reading glasses. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his black robe pristine. He had the same cold, detached expression he'd worn throughout the entire trial. "All rise," the bailiff called out, though there was hardly anyone to stand. Naomi rose shakily, the chains at her wrists rattling. Mr. Keyes put a hand on her elbow to steady her, but quickly withdrew it when the bailiff shot him a warning look. "Be seated," Judge Monroe intoned. His voice carried the weight of authority, each word measured and precise. "We're here today for sentencing in the case of the state versus Naomi Talcott Daniels." The prosecutor stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, the state has proven beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant committed a premeditated act of murder against Tyler Green, a respected member of this community. The evidence clearly shows that Ms. Talcott Daniels, an uninvited guest, brought a weapon to the victim's home and—" "Objection, Your Honor," Mr. Keyes interrupted, his voice thin and strained. "There's no evidence she brought any weapon. The letter opener belonged to the Green family." Judge Monroe's eyes narrowed. "Overruled. Continue, Counselor." The prosecutor smiled slightly. "As I was saying, the defendant, who had no invitation or right to be present, took the life of a promising young man from a prestigious family. The Green family has deep roots in this community, while the defendant—" He paused meaningfully. "Well, her background speaks for itself." Naomi's fingers dug into her palms. She kept her eyes fixed on her lap, watching a drop of water fall from her damp hair onto the orange fabric. The letter opener had been on the desk. She'd never even seen it before that night, but none of that seemed to matter anymore. Mr. Keyes stood again, shuffling through his thin stack of papers. "Your Honor, the defense has repeatedly requested access to the complete witness list and evidence files. We've been denied at every turn. How can we mount an adequate defense when—" "Mr. Keyes," Judge Monroe cut him off. "These matters have been addressed. The court has ruled on issues of evidence and witness access. Do you have anything new to add regarding sentencing?" Mr. Keyes' shoulders slumped. "No, Your Honor." The silence in the courtroom grew heavy. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat. Too fast, too loud. She thought of her mother outside in the rain, of her empty bedroom at home, of all the college acceptance letters she'd never get to open. Judge Monroe cleared his throat, adjusting his papers with deliberate movements. "Having reviewed all evidence presented, and considering the particularly heinous nature of this crime, this court has no choice but to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law." He paused, his eyes cold as they settled on Naomi. "The defendant is hereby sentenced to death by lethal injection, to be carried out—" A low creak cut through the silence as the heavy courtroom doors swung open. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, measured, confident steps that made Judge Monroe pause mid-sentence. A man in a perfectly tailored gray suit walked toward the front of the courtroom. His presence seemed to fill the space, though his expression remained neutral, composed. His silver-streaked hair was neatly trimmed, his bearing that of someone used to commanding attention without having to ask for it. Judge Monroe's face flickered with recognition, then something close to uncertainty. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Even the prosecutor's smug expression faltered. The man stopped at the center of the courtroom, his voice clear and steady as he addressed the bench. "I'm James Talcott, United States Attorney General." His words carried a weight that made even Judge Monroe straighten in his seat. "This proceeding is unlawful. Effective immediately, I'm placing it under federal review." Naomi lifted her head slowly, looking at the man, at James Talcott, for the first time. She saw something in the set of his jaw, in the way he held himself, that seemed strangely familiar. Like looking in a mirror that showed you someone else's reflection. The courtroom fell into a thick, uncomfortable silence. Judge Monroe's hand remained suspended in midair. the gavel frozen between judgment and uncertainty. The bailiff shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes darting between the judge and the attorney general, caught in the awkward space between protocol and unprecedented interruption. Naomi turned her head slowly, the chains at her wrists jingling softly with the movement. The name Talcott echoed in her mind, connecting to the document she'd seen earlier, her full name printed in cold official type. She studied his face, searching for something familiar, but found only the composed features of a stranger in an expensive suit. The prosecutor was the first to recover, rising quickly from his chair. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The state has jurisdiction in this matter, and—" "Actually?" James Talcott interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who rarely needed to raise it. "It doesn't." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "This case involves multiple violations of federal civil rights statutes, including but not limited to illegal detention, denial of due process, and racial bias in sentencing." Judge Monroe's face had taken on an ashen quality, the stern authority of moments ago replaced by something closer to fear. He watched as James approached the bench, each step measured and deliberate on the polished floor. "Furthermore," James continued, "there are serious questions about tampering with evidence, witness intimidation, and the systematic exclusion of family members from legal proceedings." He placed the envelope on the judge's desk. This federal injunction, signed by the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, places this case under immediate Department of Justice oversight. The bailiff's hand had drifted to his weapon, more from nervous habit than any real threat. Mr. Keyes sat perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter whatever miracle was unfolding before him. Judge Monroe's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the documents inside, his expression growing more troubled with each page. Finally, he cleared his throat. "This appears to be in order." The words seemed to pain him. "This court will comply with federal oversight." "Thank you, Your Honor," James said, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a request. He turned to address the room. "Two federal marshals are waiting outside. They will take custody of Ms. Daniels immediately. All case files are to be transferred to the Department of Justice by end of business today." The prosecutor jumped to his feet again. "This is outrageous. The Green family dash." "Will be notified through appropriate channels," James cut him off smoothly, "along with anyone else who attempted to influence these proceedings improperly." The doors opened again and two marshals entered, a man and woman in dark suits, their badges gleaming at their belts. They moved with quiet efficiency, approaching Naomi's table. "Ms. Daniels," the female marshal said gently, "please come with us. You're being transferred to federal protective custody." Naomi stood slowly, her legs unsteady. The past few minutes felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. The marshals flanked her, their presence protective rather than threatening. As they led her toward the door, James stepped forward. "A moment, please." The marshals paused, and James approached Naomi carefully, maintaining a respectful distance. His composed expression softened slightly, showing the first crack in his professional facade. "Naomi, I know who you are," Naomi interrupted, her voice quiet but steady. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 18 years of absence. "I just don't know why you're here." James's carefully maintained control faltered for just a moment, a flash of pain crossing his features. But before he could respond, the marshals were moving again, guiding Naomi through the door and into a private hallway. Outside the courthouse, Lisa arrived breathless, her clothes still damp from the rain. She burst through the main doors only to find the courtroom already empty. A young clerk informed her that Naomi had been transferred but couldn't, or wouldn't, say where. "What do you mean, transferred?" Lisa demanded, her voice rising. "She's my daughter. I have a right to know where she is." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the clerk replied nervously. "The media blackout is still in effect. I can't provide any information about the case." Lisa turned away in frustration, pacing the marble hallway. Through a large window, she caught movement in the courthouse parking lot. James Talcott stood there, speaking with the federal marshals, his gray suit stark against the overcast sky. He must have felt her gaze because he looked up suddenly, meeting her eyes through the rain-streaked glass. For a moment, they stared at each other across the distance, the man who had disappeared 18 years ago and the woman who had raised their daughter alone. Lisa's expression hardened, her features settling into something beyond anger or hurt. This was rage, quiet, controlled, and absolutely focused. It was the look of a mother who had watched her daughter vanish into a rigged system, only to be saved by the very man who had abandoned them both. James held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away first. Lisa watched him turn back to the marshals, her hands clenched at her sides, the rain continuing to fall between them like an endless stream of unspoken words. The DOJ holding room felt like a hospital waiting area, clean, temperature-controlled, and utterly devoid of personality. The harsh fluorescent lights bounced off pale green walls, creating an artificial brightness that made Naomi's eyes hurt. She sat in a cushioned chair that, while more comfortable than her previous accommodations, still felt institutional. A gentle knock preceded the entrance of Agent Martinez, a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She carried a tray with what appeared to be actual restaurant food, a sandwich that wasn't pre-packaged, fresh fruit, and a bottle of water that wasn't from a prison commissary. "Here you go," Agent Martinez said, placing the tray on the small table in front of Naomi. "Let me know if you need anything else." Naomi nodded, picking up half of the sandwich with hands that wouldn't quite stay steady. She took small bites, her stomach still knotted from the events in the courtroom. The food tasted better than anything she'd had in weeks, but she could barely focus on it. The room fell into silence again after Agent Martinez left. No echoing footsteps in concrete hallways, no rattling of cell doors, no shouted conversations between inmates. Just the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional muffled sound of phones ringing somewhere down the hall. When the door opened again, Naomi knew who it would be before she looked up. James Talcott stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He'd loosened his tie slightly, and some of the careful composure from the courtroom had faded, revealing the tension underneath. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Naomi gestured vaguely at the chair across from her, neither welcoming nor refusing. James closed the door behind him and sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. "I need to explain something," he began, his hands clasped together on his knee. "I had no idea you existed until 3 days ago. Your name triggered an alert in our system when the death penalty recommendation was filed." Naomi set down what remained of her sandwich, her appetite vanishing completely. She didn't speak, but her silence carried its own weight. "There were sealed records," James continued, his professional tone slipping slightly, "from when your mother was in law school. She filed preliminary paternity documentation but never completed the process. Those records were buried deep, but they created a legal connection. When your full name appeared in the sentencing documents, it flagged a conflict of interest at the federal level." He paused, watching her face for any reaction. Naomi kept her expression carefully blank, a skill she'd perfected over the past few weeks of interrogations and hearings. "The system is designed to catch these things automatically, to prevent family members of high-ranking officials from being processed without proper oversight. When I saw the alert ... He trailed off, seeming to lose his carefully prepared speech. "I had to check the birth date 3 times. I couldn't believe—" "You left before I was born," Naomi said quietly, cutting through his explanation. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "That's all I need to know." The words landed like physical blows. James didn't try to defend himself or offer excuses. He sat there, absorbing the simple truth of her statement, his usual eloquence deserting him. The silence stretched between them, filled with 18 years of absence. Finally, James nodded once, accepting her response. He stood up slowly, straightening his tie in what seemed like an unconscious gesture. "You'll be moved to a secure location tonight," he said, his professional mask sliding back into place. "It's temporary, just until we can sort out the legal situation. Your mother will be allowed to visit once we've established proper security protocols." Naomi didn't respond. She turned back to the window where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot below. Hours later, as evening settled over the city, A black SUV with tinted windows carried Naomi through quiet residential streets. They pulled up to a modern house with a high-security fence and a guardhouse at the entrance. 2 agents stepped out first, scanning the area before opening her door. The house was nice, much nicer than anywhere Naomi had lived, but the security cameras and reinforced windows made it feel more like a well-decorated prison than a home. She walked to the living room window, looking out at the street beyond the gate. Her mother's familiar blue Honda was parked just outside the entrance. Even from this distance, Naomi could see Lisa sitting in the driver's seat, her posture tense as she spoke with the guard. The guard held up a hand in a wait gesture and picked up his phone. Naomi pressed her hand against the cool glass, watching her mother wait for permission to see her own daughter. The distance between them felt both physical and symbolic, another barrier in a long line of barriers that had been placed between them over the past weeks. The guard spoke into his phone, nodding occasionally. Lisa's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she waited for an answer. Naomi could read the tension in her mother's shoulders, the careful way she held herself in check despite what must have been overwhelming frustration. The scene captured everything wrong with their situation, how a system meant to protect could instead separate, how justice could become twisted into something cold and procedural, how even reunion had to be filtered through layers of official approval. Naomi stood at the window, waiting with her mother, both of them caught in the space between safety and freedom, protection and control, rescue and a whole new kind of confinement. After what felt like an eternity of phone calls and security checks, Lisa was finally cleared to enter the safe house. The front door opened with a soft click, and she stepped into the well-lit foyer, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Naomi appeared from the living room, and without a word, they moved toward each other. The embrace was different from their usual hugs, tighter, longer, heavy with everything they couldn't say. Naomi buried her face in her mother's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of Lisa's shampoo and laundry detergent. There were no tears, just the profound relief of being together again after weeks of forced separation. Lisa held her daughter close, one hand stroking Naomi's hair like she used to when Naomi was small. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The simple act of holding each other said everything necessary about fear, love, and survival. From the doorway of an adjacent room, James watched silently. Lisa felt his presence but deliberately kept her back turned, focusing entirely on her daughter. Her rejection of him was clear and absolute. He might have intervened in the courtroom, but that didn't erase 18 years of absence. After several long moments, Lisa pulled back slightly, keeping her hands on Naomi's shoulders as she studied her daughter's face. The fluorescent lighting did nothing to hide the dark circles under Naomi's eyes, or the way stress had sharpened her features. "Come on," Lisa said softly, guiding Naomi toward the living room couch. "Let's sit down." They settled onto the plush sofa, Lisa keeping one arm around Naomi's shoulders. The room was tastefully decorated but impersonal. Standard government safe house decor designed to be comfortable without being memorable. "Mom," Naomi said, her voice quiet but steady. "What's happening?" "Really happening." Lisa took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. Her years of legal training helped her break down the complexity into something manageable. The trial. Everything about it was wrong. Irregular. I've been going through all the documentation I could find, and none of it follows proper procedure. "What do you mean?" "They filed it under something called a state emergency clause. It's rarely used, meant for cases that need to be expedited for public safety reasons. Usually terrorism or organized crime. There was no reason to use it for your case." Naomi frowned. "Is that why everything happened so fast?" "Partly, but there's more." Lisa pulled out a folded paper from her bag, a copy of the original court filing. The docket number was sealed. That means it wasn't entered into the regular court system. Cases like that are sometimes called silent dockets. They're processed outside normal channels with minimal oversight. How is that legal? It's not supposed to be, not for a case like yours. Lisa's voice carried years of frustrated knowledge about how systems meant to protect could be twisted. And here's the strangest part. No federal oversight was triggered until the sentencing phase. That should have been impossible given who your father is. Naomi stiffened slightly at the reference to James, but she kept listening. "Your legal name was never supposed to include Talcott," Lisa continued. "I made sure of that when you were born. I filed the initial paperwork during law school, but I never completed it. Your birth certificate, your school records, everything, it's always been just Daniels." Understanding began to dawn on Naomi's face. So how did it show up now? Someone with high-level clearance must have accessed sealed family court records. They would have needed federal authorization to do that. Lisa's voice grew tight with controlled anger. "Someone deliberately flagged you, Naomi. They knew exactly who you were and who your father was. This wasn't random." The weight of this revelation settled over them both. Naomi leaned back against the couch, processing everything she'd just learned. Lisa watched her daughter carefully, recognizing the quiet strength that had always been there, now tested in ways she'd never wanted. The evening wore on. Neither of them wanted to move to separate rooms, so they stayed on the couch, sharing the space like they used to during thunderstorms when Naomi was young. Eventually, exhaustion won out. Naomi drifted off first, her head resting against her mother's shoulder. Lisa followed soon after, her arm still protectively around her daughter. In the study down the hall, James sat at a heavy wooden desk, his phone pressed to his ear. The room was dark except for a single desk lamp, casting shadows across his face as he spoke in low, measured tones. "I want full access to the state's database," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his authority. "Pull every silent docket filed in the last 5 years." The man on the other end of the line hesitated. When he spoke, his words carried a clear warning. "Sir, you sure? That's going to expose a lot more than her case." James looked through the doorway toward the living room where his daughter and her mother slept. His expression hardened with determination. "I know," he replied firmly. "Do it anyway." 2 days passed in the safe house like molasses dripping through an hourglass. The federal agents maintained their quiet vigilance while Lisa and Naomi tried to establish some semblance of normalcy within their confined space. James kept his distance, spending most of his time in the study, surrounded by stacks of papers and making endless phone calls. On the morning of the 3rd day, a thick manila envelope arrived by special courier. James sat at his desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he methodically went through the contents. With each page he turned, his expression grew darker, his jaw tightening until a muscle twitched visibly in his cheek. The numbers were damning. 46 cases spread across 3 rural counties. Each one followed the same pattern: expedited trials, minimal documentation, sealed records. The demographics painted an even clearer picture. Page after page showed young faces: Black teenagers, Hispanic college students, immigrant workers. All of them had faced serious charges. All of them had their cases rushed through the system with barely a whisper. James pulled out his notepad and started making calculations. The statistical probability of this pattern occurring naturally was virtually 0. This wasn't coincidence or bureaucratic oversight. This was systematic. He looked closer at the dates, the judges assigned, the public defenders appointed. Everything was too neat, too organized. Some cases were processed so quickly that the defendants barely had time to understand the charges against them, let alone mount a proper defense. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made him look up. One of his agents stood in the doorway, holding another envelope. "Sir, the additional files you requested from the state archive." James nodded, taking the new documents. These were older cases going back nearly a decade. As he spread them across his desk, the pattern became even more apparent. The same judges' names appeared repeatedly, the same prosecutors, the same rapid timeline from arrest to sentencing. He needed more information, but he couldn't use official channels. Too many eyes would be watching. That's when he remembered Marcus Chen, a district clerk who'd retired last year after 3 decades of service. Marcus had always been meticulous about his record-keeping, and more importantly, he had no love for the political machine that ran the county. James changed into casual clothes, khakis and a polo shirt instead of his usual suit. He drove himself to Marcus's small house on the outskirts of town, careful to take a roundabout route to avoid being followed. Marcus answered the door wearing reading glasses and a cardigan. His eyes widened slightly at seeing the U.S. Attorney General on his doorstep, but he quickly recovered his composure. "Come in," he said simply, leading James to a small study filled with books and filing cabinets. "I need to ask you about some cases," James began, keeping his voice neutral. "Off the record." Marcus settled into his worn leather chair, folding his hands in his lap. "The quiet files," he said, not a question but a statement. When James nodded, Marcus continued. "They started calling them that about 15 years ago. Just make it go away. That's what the judges would say." He pulled open a drawer in his desk, removing a small notebook. "I kept track, not official records, just my own notes. Couldn't stomach watching it happen without leaving some kind of evidence." James leaned forward as Marcus flipped through the pages. How did they choose which cases to make go away? Sometimes it was convenience, cases they didn't want clogging up the regular docket. But other times, Marcus paused, adjusting his glasses. Other times, the suggestions came from higher up. Senator Green's office was particularly interested in certain cases, anything that might affect the county's image or disturb certain demographics. "Senator Green," James repeated softly. "Tyler Green's father." Marcus nodded slowly. "When I heard about what happened to that girl, your daughter, I knew it would be handled the same way. They always use the same playbook, but they didn't count on who she was, did they?" James drove back to the safe house with Marcus's notebook tucked safely in his briefcase, along with copies of his unofficial records. The weight of the evidence felt heavy against his leg as he walked through security and made his way to the main living area. Lisa and Naomi were sitting at the kitchen table sharing a quiet lunch. They both looked up as he entered, Lisa's expression guarded, Naomi's carefully blank. Without speaking, James began laying out documents on the table, creating a timeline of cases, faces, dates, and outcomes. Lisa's legal training kicked in immediately. She began scanning the documents, her finger tracing patterns across the pages. Naomi watched more slowly, taking in each face, each name, each story that had been buried. 46 cases, James explained quietly. All in the last 5 years. All handled through the same quiet system they tried to use on you. Most of them are serving long sentences with minimal possibility of appeal because their trials were rushed and the evidence was controlled. Naomi's hand hovered over a photograph of a girl not much older than herself. "So I'm not the only one?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of understanding that her nightmare was part of something much larger. Lisa's posture stiffened, her hands clenching into fists on the table. The mother in her wanted to shield Naomi from this truth, but the former law student recognized the importance of facing it head-on. "No," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "You were just the one they couldn't bury." James looked at his daughter, really looked at her, seeing both her vulnerability and her strength. "They didn't think I'd come looking," he said simply. The words hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of both his past absence and his present determination. The kitchen fell silent as the three of them continued to study the evidence spread across the table. Through the window, federal agents patrolled the perimeter of the safe house, while somewhere in the county courthouse another set of files was probably being prepared for quiet processing. But this time, someone was watching. This time, the silence would be broken. Under the watchful eyes of federal agents in unmarked cars, Lisa drove Naomi back to their neighborhood. The familiar streets felt different now. Every window seemed to hide watching eyes. Every corner held potential whispers. The late spring sun cast long shadows across their path as they approached Millbrook High School. Naomi pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the passenger window, her breath creating small clouds of fog. The school building loomed ahead, its brick facade unchanged, but somehow more imposing than before. As they drove past the main entrance, her eyes automatically went to the Senior Achievements Board, a place where her name had been prominently displayed just weeks ago. The board had been updated. Where Naomi Daniels, National Merit Scholar, once stood, there was now a generic Class of 2023 placeholder. It was as if she had been erased, wiped away like chalk from a blackboard. A few teachers were leaving for the day, carrying stacks of papers and travel mugs. Mrs. Henderson, Her former English teacher, who had written her college recommendation letter, spotted their car. She quickly turned her head away, hustling to her vehicle with quickened steps. Mr. Patterson, who had coached her debate team, suddenly became very interested in his phone. "They're scared," Lisa said quietly, her hand steady on the steering wheel. "People always are when they don't know which side is safe." Naomi didn't respond. She watched her school disappear in the side mirror until it was just a blur of red brick and shame. The federal escort maintained their discreet distance as Lisa turned onto their street. Their house looked exactly as they had left it. The same faded blue paint, the same creaky steps leading to the front porch, the same wind chimes her grandmother had given them tinkling softly in the breeze. But something was different. Lisa noticed it first. She parked the car and got out slowly, her eyes fixed on the porch. There, carved deep into the wooden railing, was a single word: murderer. The letters were rough, angry. Someone had taken their time, pressing hard enough to splinter the wood. Lisa stood there for a moment, her face unreadable. Then, without a word, she walked to the garage and returned with a can of paint and 2 brushes. Naomi joined her mother on the porch. They worked in silence, covering the hateful word with steady strokes of blue paint. The federal agents watched from their cars but made no move to intervene or offer help. This was something mother and daughter needed to do themselves. Inside, the house felt both familiar and strange. Their cats, recently returned from the neighbor's care, wound around their legs, purring as if nothing had changed. Naomi climbed the stairs to her room, each step creaking in its familiar pattern. Her desk was exactly as she had left it that fateful night. College brochures spread out in neat piles, her laptop closed but waiting. She sat down, running her fingers along the smooth surface before opening the computer. The screen came to life, but when she tried to log into her school account, an error message appeared. Access denied. Account deactivated. Just like that, another piece of her life had been digitally erased. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C., James Talcott sat in his office at the Department of Justice, surrounded by towers of policy documents and legislative archives. His jacket was draped over a chair, his sleeves rolled up as he methodically worked through years of paperwork. A particular file caught his attention, a joint DOJ state initiative from 7 years ago called SafePass, State Accelerated Filing and Expedited Prosecution System. The program had been designed with good intentions, allowing local courts to handle lower-level cases without federal oversight, reducing bureaucratic bottlenecks and clearing backlogs. James read through the documentation with growing unease. The program had given counties unprecedented autonomy in case management, particularly for juvenile offenders and first-time defendants. The idea had been to speed up the justice system, make it more efficient, but as he dug deeper, the truth emerged like a shadow taking shape. Counties hadn't just used the program, they had exploited it. What was meant to be a streamlined process for minor offenses had become a fast-track system for pushing through harsh sentences without proper review or oversight. The demographics were startling. Over 80% of cases processed under SafePass involved minority defendants. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was how they had nearly succeeded with Naomi. This was the system that had swallowed 46 other young lives whole. This was the machine that had been built to make things go away. With trembling fingers, James pulled out the original SafePass bill. There, at the bottom of the page, was his signature, bold, confident strokes that had helped set this whole thing in motion. He stared at it, feeling a wave of nausea rise in his throat. His own name had authorized the very system that had nearly claimed his daughter's life. Back in their home, Naomi stood at her bedroom window watching the federal agents change shifts in their cars. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, but the beauty felt distant, unreal. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her. Same face, same eyes. But something had changed. Something had hardened. Lisa appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to Naomi, who took it without turning from the window. "What if this doesn't stop?" Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I go back and they just find another way?" Lisa took a sip of her tea, her eyes meeting Naomi's reflection in the glass. When she spoke, her voice was steady, certain. Then we stay loud, and we stay alive. The morning sun crept through Naomi's bedroom window, casting thin strips of light across her bed. She had been awake for hours, watching the shadows shift and change on her ceiling. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day someone might finally listen. Down in the kitchen, Lisa sat at the worn oak table, papers spread out in a careful pattern before her. She had arranged everything chronologically: the initial police report, the rushed arraignment documents, the court transcripts that seemed suspiciously incomplete. Her old legal training showed in the precise way she had highlighted inconsistencies, drawn connections with thin red lines between dates and names. Naomi appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a simple blue sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her face clean and composed. She looked older somehow, as if the past few weeks had aged her beyond her 18 years. "Did you sleep?" Lisa asked without looking up from her notes. "Some," Naomi replied, moving to the coffee maker. The familiar routine of measuring grounds and filling the water tank helped steady her hands. "What time is she coming?" 9. Lisa checked her watch. "Just under an hour." They moved around each other in the kitchen with practiced ease, sharing space but barely speaking. The federal agents outside had changed shifts at dawn, new faces in the same unmarked cars. The morning news played quietly on the small kitchen TV, but neither woman paid attention to it. Their focus was internal, preparing. At precisely 9 o'clock, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Lisa reached the door first, opening it to reveal Darla Mendez. The federal investigator stood on their porch, briefcase in hand, wearing a charcoal gray suit that spoke of both authority and careful attention to detail. Her natural hair was styled professionally, her expression neutral but engaged. "Mrs. Daniels," Darla said, extending her hand, "thank you for meeting with me. And you must be Naomi." Naomi nodded from where she stood in the living room entrance. Something in Darla's direct gaze made her stand a little straighter. They settled in the living room, Darla taking the armchair while Lisa and Naomi sat together on the couch. The investigator pulled out a small recording device and a notepad. "I want to be clear about my role here," Darla began, her voice carrying both warmth and professional distance. "I'm conducting an independent review of not just your case, Naomi, but the entire pattern of judicial conduct in this district. Everything you tell me will be documented and verified. I need you to be completely honest, even about things that might seem small or unimportant." Naomi folded her hands in her lap. "Where should I start?" "The night of the party. Take me through everything." For the next 2 hours, Naomi spoke. She described the text from Maya, the collected phones at the door, the way Tyler had cornered her in the hallway. Her voice remained steady as she recounted the struggle, the letter opener, the blood. She didn't flinch when describing the cold metal of the handcuffs, the mumbled Miranda rights, the long night in the interview room. Darla took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but never interrupting the flow of Naomi's story. Her questions were precise. Was there a medical exam after your arrest? Number, did anyone photograph your defensive wounds? Number, were you allowed to contact your mother? Number, when Naomi described the pressure to sign a confession, Darla's pen paused briefly. "Officer Harlan, can you remember his exact words?" "He said if I admitted it was an accident, they could help me," Naomi recalled. "He kept saying I seemed like a good kid who made a mistake, that if I just signed the statement, I could probably go home." Lisa's hands tightened in her lap, but she remained silent. Darla nodded, making another note. "And your public defender, Mr. Keys. How much time did he spend reviewing your case with you?" "Maybe 20 minutes total," Naomi said. "He seemed tired, overwhelmed. He told me things didn't look good, but never explained why or what my options were." The questions continued, methodical and thorough. Darla's expression revealed nothing, but her note-taking grew more intense when discussing the sealed court proceedings and the speed of the trial. Finally, she set down her pen. "Naomi, your case is the most egregious example we've found of judicial misconduct in this district. But it's not isolated. We've identified similar patterns in dozens of cases. Rushed proceedings, minimal defense, sealed records. The difference is that most didn't have someone like your father in a position to intervene. The word father hung in the air like smoke. Naomi's face remained carefully blank. What happens now? Lisa asked, breaking her long silence. We continue gathering evidence, Darla replied, packing up her materials. Every inconsistency, every breach of procedure, every violation of due process. It all builds the case for systematic reform. Your daughter's experience might help prevent this from happening to others. After showing Darla out, Naomi walked onto the front porch. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of newly cut grass and blooming dogwoods. She sat on the steps, conscious of the fresh paint covering the carved slur but not looking at it. A boy from down the street, maybe 12 or 13, rode by on his bike. He slowed as he approached their house, his eyes fixed on Naomi with a mixture of fear and fascination. As he passed, he spat deliberately onto the sidewalk, then pedaled away faster. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't wipe away the tears that threatened to fall. She just watched the boy disappear around the corner, her posture straight and still. Lisa appeared in the doorway behind her. She had seen everything. "Can we move?" Naomi asked quietly, still staring at the point where the boy had vanished. Lisa's response was immediate and firm. "Not yet." James Talcott stood at the head of the mahogany conference table in the Justice Department's secure meeting room. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across the faces of 7 state judicial liaisons seated before him. Their expressions ranged from mildly concerned to openly defensive. He placed a thick manila folder on the table with deliberate care. The sound of it hitting the polished wood seemed to echo in the tense silence. 46 cases, James said, his voice steady and measured. All processed through what you called the silent docket system, all involving minority defendants, all pushed through without proper review or documentation. Harold Matthews, the senior liaison from Green's home district, cleared his throat. With all due respect, Mr. Attorney General, expedited processing is standard procedure for managing court backlogs. There's nothing irregular about streamlining certain cases. James opened the folder and began laying out documents one by one. Streamlining is one thing. This is something else entirely. He pointed to highlighted sections on various papers. No proper arraignments, no victim impact statements, no preservation of evidence. Defense attorneys given less than an hour with their clients before trial. Those are clerical oversights at worst, another liaison argued, though his voice wavered slightly. James pulled out a stack of printed emails, each page marked with yellow sticky tabs. These are internal communications from 5 years ago. They reference something called the low-resistance sentencing pilot. Interesting choice of words. The room grew still. Matthews's face had lost some of its color. "Let me read you some excerpts," James continued, picking up the first page. "Program shows promising results in reducing defendant resistance through accelerated processing." And here's another. "Target demographics responding as anticipated to streamlined sentencing approach." He looked up from the papers. Would anyone like to explain what target demographics means in this context? The liaisons exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman at the far end of the table began gathering her things as if preparing to leave. "Sit down," James said quietly. The woman froze, then slowly returned to her seat. He spread more documents across the table. "My signature appears on every major policy document related to this program. I was told it was for managing petty crimes, shoplifting, vandalism, minor drug possession. Instead, you used it to fast-track felony cases involving minority defendants, pushing them through a system designed to deny them proper representation or appeal." Matthews finally broke. His carefully maintained facade of bureaucratic indifference cracked, revealing something darker underneath. "It was Senator Green's office," he said, ignoring the sharp looks from his colleagues. "They approached us with the initial proposal, said it would help clear the backlog in rural courts, reduce costs, improve efficiency metrics. And you never questioned why certain cases were being selected for this efficient processing? James asked. We just implemented the program as designed, Matthews replied, his voice smaller now. The guidelines came from above. Your office approved the framework. James placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. My office approved a program for expediting minor offenses. You turned it into a tool for systematic discrimination, and you used my signature, my authority, to make it happen. He straightened up, buttoning his suit jacket. Every one of those 46 cases will be reviewed. Every defendant will receive a proper hearing, and every person in this room who knowingly participated in this program will be investigated. You can't do that, one of the liaisons protested. The political fallout. The political fallout? James cut him off. My daughter was nearly sentenced to death because of this system, a system I unknowingly helped create. So don't talk to me about political fallout. The silence that followed was absolute. James gathered the documents back into the folder with precise movements. This meeting is over. Expect contact from federal investigators within the week. I suggest you all retain counsel. The liaisons filed out quietly. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. Matthews lingered at the door, looking like he wanted to say something, but James turned his back, effectively dismissing him. When he finally returned to his hotel room that evening, the weight of the day settled onto his shoulders like a physical burden. The room was dark except for a small desk lamp, illuminating a single sheet of paper, his resignation letter typed and ready, lacking only his signature. James hung his jacket over the chair and loosened his tie. The letter had seemed like the honorable choice earlier that day. Take responsibility. Step down. Let someone else clean up the mess. He picked up an expensive fountain pen, a gift from his first year as a federal prosecutor. The metal felt cold in his hand as he held it over the signature line. But he didn't lower it to the paper. Instead, he raised his eyes to the mirror mounted above the desk. The face that looked back at him was tired but composed. There were new lines around his eyes, and his hair had more gray than he remembered. But what struck him most was his expression. He had expected to see shame there, the crushing guilt of a man who had failed in his duties. Instead, he saw something different, something quieter but more substantial: resolve. His signature on those documents had enabled injustice, but maybe his signature, his authority, his position, could also help dismantle it. Resigning would be easier, cleaner. But it wouldn't help Naomi. It wouldn't help any of the other victims of this system. The pen remained hovering above the resignation letter as James held his own gaze in the mirror. The choice before him was clear: walk away or stay and fight. The morning sun filtered through Lisa's kitchen window as she sorted through the day's mail. Bills, advertisements, and a plain white envelope with no return address. Her fingers hesitated over the unfamiliar handwriting before carefully opening it. Inside was a letter written in neat, precise penmanship. Dear Ms. Daniels, my name is Teresa Wells. You don't know me, but I know about your daughter Naomi. I saw her name mentioned in a legal aid blog post about questionable juvenile sentencing practices. I've been following cases like hers for 2 years now, ever since my son Elijah died in prison. He was sentenced by Judge Monroe, just like Naomi. Same rushed trial, same closed proceedings. Elijah couldn't handle it. He took his own life 3 months into his sentence. He was only 19. If you're willing, I'd like to meet with you and Naomi. I have information that might help, and maybe sharing our stories could prevent this from happening to someone else. My address is below if you want to talk. Sincerely, Teresa Wells. Lisa read the letter twice, her hands trembling slightly. She glanced at the clock. Naomi would be home from her therapy appointment soon. Setting the letter down, she made herself a cup of tea and waited. When Naomi came through the door 20 minutes later, Lisa was still at the kitchen table. There's something we need to talk about, she said softly. After reading the letter, Naomi simply nodded. When do we go? The next afternoon, Lisa's car pulled up to a small ranch house with faded blue siding. The lawn was neatly kept, with carefully tended flower beds along the front walk. Teresa Wells opened the door before they reached the porch. She was a tall woman with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing pressed khakis and a floral blouse. Her eyes were kind, but carried a weight that Lisa recognized, the look of a mother who had lost too much. "Thank you for coming," Teresa said, leading them through the house. "I thought we might be more comfortable in the backyard. I made some lemonade." The backyard was modest but peaceful, with a wooden picnic table set under an old maple tree. 3 glasses of lemonade sweated in the warm afternoon air. They sat, Teresa on one side, Lisa and Naomi on the other. "I want to show you something first," Teresa said, pulling out a manila envelope. She spread several documents across the table: court papers, hearing notices, sentencing records. "This was Elijah's case. Look at the details." Lisa leaned forward, scanning the papers. Her breath caught. "Same judge. Same prosecutor," Teresa added. "Same pattern of rushed hearings and denied appeals. Elijah was accused of stealing a car. He swore he was just a passenger, that he didn't know it was stolen. But they never investigated, never interviewed the other boys involved. Just pushed it through the system as fast as they could." Naomi sat perfectly still, her eyes moving from document to document. The signatures were identical to those on her own papers: Judge Monroe's sharp scrawl, the prosecutor's looping letters. "Elijah tried to tell them," Teresa continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "He wrote letters to the judge, to his court-appointed lawyer, to anyone who would listen. But it was like he was invisible. They just kept moving forward, checking boxes, following their expedited process." She pulled out a photograph, a young black man in a graduation cap and gown, smiling broadly at the camera. This was 2 months before his arrest. He had just finished high school, got accepted to community college. He wanted to study automotive engineering. Naomi reached out slowly, touching the edge of the photo. "What happened to him in prison?" Teresa's hands clasped tightly around her glass of lemonade. "He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. His letters home got shorter and shorter. The last time I visited, he could barely look at me. 3 days later." She didn't finish the sentence. Lisa reached across the table, covering Teresa's hand with her own. No words seemed adequate. "When I saw your daughter's name in that blog post," Teresa said, "I knew I had to reach out. These cases, they're not isolated incidents. They're part of a pattern, and if no one speaks up, it's just going to keep happening." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the picnic table as they talked. Teresa shared more details about Elijah's case, about her attempts to get answers after his death, about the wall of silence she encountered at every turn. Naomi listened intently but spoke little. Her eyes kept returning to Elijah's graduation photo, to the bright future visible in his smile. As the sun began to set, Teresa stood up. "Wait here a moment," she said, disappearing into the house. When she returned, she held a folded piece of paper, worn at the creases from repeated handling. "This was the last thing Elijah wrote," she said, holding it out to Naomi. "Before his sentencing. I think he'd want you to have it." Naomi took the paper carefully, unfolding it. The message was brief, written in hurried handwriting. "They made me feel invisible. Don't let them do that to anyone else." She refolded the note with trembling fingers and slipped it into her pocket. When Lisa and Teresa exchanged phone numbers and promises to stay in touch, Naomi stood slightly apart, her hand resting over the pocket containing Elijah's words. The drive home was silent. Lisa glanced occasionally at her daughter, but Naomi kept her gaze fixed out the window, watching the suburban landscape blur past. The note remained in her pocket, its weight far heavier than paper should be. The morning light was harsh against the sterile walls of the DOJ safe house. Naomi sat in a conference room, facing 3 members of the Civil Rights Inquiry Board. Their faces were serious, but not unkind as they set up recording equipment and arranged their papers. "Take your time, Ms. Daniels," said the woman in the center, introducing herself as Dr. Carter. "We want to hear everything, in your own words." Naomi's hands were steady as she took a sip of water. She had spent the night thinking about Elijah's note, about Teresa's pain, about all the others who never got the chance to speak. When she began, her voice was clear and strong. "It started at the lake house party," she said. "They made us leave our phones at the door. I didn't think much of it then, but now I understand why." There would be no evidence, no videos, no texts, nothing to prove what really happened. She described the attack in detail, Tyler's unwanted advances, how he blocked the door, the terror she felt when she realized she was trapped. "I called for help first," she emphasized. "I tried to get past him. The letter opener. It was the last thing I wanted to do." Dr. Carter nodded, making notes. "Tell us about your arrest." "The officers barely looked at my bruises," Naomi continued. "They didn't take photos, didn't ask about what led up to it. One of them said I was hysterical, even though I was completely quiet. They read my rights so fast and quiet I barely heard them." She described the cold interview room, Officer Harlan's aggressive questioning, the pressure to sign a statement she wasn't allowed to read properly. "Every time I asked for my mom or a lawyer, they'd say soon or after you cooperate, but soon never came." The board members exchanged glances as Naomi detailed her rushed arraignment, the denied phone calls, the isolation in juvenile detention. "My public defender, Mr. Keyes, I only saw him twice. He barely knew my name, let alone my case, and every time I tried to explain what happened, someone would cut me off or write something different in their notes." Her voice remained steady as she described the trial, if it could even be called that. "The judge wouldn't look at me. The prosecutor talked about me like I wasn't even there. They kept using words like violent and unstable, but never mentioned that I was defending myself. Never mentioned Tyler's history of aggression. Never mentioned the missing phones or witness statements." "Were you afraid?" Dr. Carter asked gently. Naomi's composure wavered slightly. "The worst part was, I wasn't allowed to be afraid. Every time I showed any emotion, any at all, they'd write it down as aggressive behavior or lack of remorse. So I just stopped feeling, stopped reacting. It was like I had to become invisible to survive." For the next 2 hours, Naomi answered their questions with careful precision. She provided dates, names, specific phrases used by officials. She described the irregularities in her paperwork, the missing notifications to her mother, the sudden appearance of her father's name on documents. "Last question," Dr. Carter said finally. "What do you want to come from this?" Naomi sat straighter. "I want the truth to come out, not just for me, but for Elijah Wells, and anyone else they tried to make disappear. I want Judge Monroe and the prosecutor off the bench. I want the whole system examined, not just reviewed, but really looked at. Because this isn't about one bad judge or one corrupt program. It's about who gets to be heard and who gets silenced." After the recording stopped, Dr. Carter reached across the table and squeezed Naomi's hand. "Thank you for your courage today. We'll be in touch soon." Outside the conference room, James Talcott waited in the hallway. He had changed since their first meeting. His suit was less crisp, his posture less rigid. The weight of what he'd discovered seemed to sit heavily on his shoulders. "How did it go?" he asked quietly. "I told them everything," Naomi replied. "The truth this time. All of it." James nodded, then gestured to some chairs by the window. They sat, the afternoon sun casting long shadows between them. "What do you want to do next?" he asked simply. There was no attempt to justify his past actions, no try at paternal guidance, just a straight question. Naomi looked out the window for a long moment. "I don't know everything yet," she said finally, "but I want to finish school. I want my diploma, and I want Judge Monroe and the prosecutor off the bench. They shouldn't have the power to do this to anyone else." "Then we'll start there," James replied. His tone was matter of fact, but his eyes showed determination. "The Education Department has already been notified about reinstating your status. As for the judge and prosecutor, the inquiry board's findings will help with that." That evening, Naomi sat cross-legged on her bed at home, her laptop balanced on her knees. She logged into the new email account the DOJ had created for her, a secure address where she would receive updates about her case and the ongoing investigation. At the top of her inbox was a news alert. The headline made her breath catch. "Senator Greene's office linked to sealed trial program." She clicked it, reading the article twice to make sure she understood every word. Someone had leaked initial findings from the investigation. revealing the connection between Tyler's father and the system that had nearly destroyed her life. Naomi closed the laptop slowly, setting it aside. For the first time since that night at the lake house, she allowed herself to take a deep, unguarded breath. The truth was finally starting to emerge, one piece at a time. A week had passed since Naomi's testimony. The federal hearing room was small and austere, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that cast a harsh glow over everyone present. James Talcott stood at the back, his presence deliberately understated as he watched Judge Albert Monroe face the disciplinary panel. The three-member panel sat behind a raised desk, their expressions carefully neutral as they reviewed the evidence spread before them. Charts showing sentencing patterns, documentation of sealed trials, internal communications linking the court to Senator Greene's office. The paper trail was damning in its thoroughness. Judge Monroe sat alone at a small table, his usual judicial robes replaced by a conservative gray suit. His posture remained rigid, maintaining the same air of authority he'd wielded from his own bench for decades. But here, in this room, that authority meant nothing. "Judge Monroe," the panel chair began, her voice steady and clinical, "our investigation has uncovered 46 cases where due process was significantly compromised. In each instance, defendants were denied proper legal representation, family notification was delayed or blocked, and trials were conducted without standard oversight." She lifted a document, reading directly from it. In 39 of these cases, the defendants were people of color. The sentencing in these cases averaged 60% higher than comparable cases in neighboring districts. Monroe's face remained impassive, but his fingers twitched slightly against the table's surface. "How do you respond to these findings?" another panel member asked. Monroe cleared his throat, his voice carrying that same measured tone he'd used to sentence countless defendants. "I was simply utilizing the legal framework provided to me. The silent docket program was approved at multiple levels. If there were concerns about its application, they should have been raised during implementation." His smugness was subtle but unmistakable, the confidence of a man who had never expected to answer for his actions. "Are you suggesting," the third panel member leaned forward, "that because a tool exists, its misuse is justified?" "I'm suggesting," Monroe's voice hardened slightly, "that I was just following the tools given to me. If they didn't want me to use them, they shouldn't have created them." From his position at the back of the room, James watched the exchange with quiet intensity. He recognized Monroe's defense strategy, the same bureaucratic deflection he himself had once hidden behind. But the panel's expressions showed it wasn't working. Across town, in a much less dramatic scene, the prosecutor from Naomi's trial was clearing out his office. No press release, no public statement, just a brief letter of resignation submitted that morning. His nameplate was already gone from the door, and his cases were being reassigned pending review. The silence of his departure spoke volumes. Back at home, Naomi sat at the kitchen table, holding a crisp white envelope with the Department of Justice seal. Her hands were steady as she read the formal language. "Upon review of case number 2023 JV 789, the Department of Justice hereby determines that significant procedural irregularities and violations of due process occurred during both investigation and trial phases. As such, all charges are dismissed with prejudice. Records related to this case will be sealed and set for immediate expungement." Lisa read over her shoulder, one hand resting lightly on Naomi's back. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The letter represented more than just legal vindication. It was freedom from the weight they'd been carrying for weeks. That evening, they sat together at dinner. No special meal, no celebration, just their usual table, their usual food. But the atmosphere was different. The constant tension that had filled their home had finally begun to dissipate. Naomi ate slowly, methodically, as if savoring the simple act of having dinner at her own table. Lisa watched her daughter with quiet attention, noting the subtle changes in her posture, the way her shoulders had finally begun to relax. After dinner, Naomi went to her room and took out Elijah's note from her desk drawer. She read the words again, though she knew them by heart. "They made me feel invisible. Don't let them do that to anyone else." She found a thumbtack and carefully pinned the note to her wall, smoothing it gently with her fingers. When she stepped back, Lisa was standing in the doorway, watching. Her mother didn't say anything about the note, but she noticed how Naomi's shoulders had loosened, how she stood straighter as if some invisible burden had finally begun to lift. They didn't need words to mark this moment. The quiet between them was enough. Not the tense silence of fear and uncertainty, but the peaceful quiet of people who could finally breathe again. 2 months passed like a slow exhale. The hallways of Marshall High School looked the same as they always had. Beige walls lined with navy blue lockers, fluorescent lights humming overhead, bulletin boards advertising club meetings and upcoming events. But for Naomi, walking these corridors felt different now. Her footsteps echoed against the linoleum as she made her way to her first class. The senior recognition board hung prominently near the main office, its golden frame containing rows of neatly printed names. Her eyes found her own. Naomi Daniels, Academic Excellence. No ceremony had marked its return. No announcement had been made. The name was simply there again, as if it had never been removed. Students moved around her like water around a stone. Some offered small nods of acknowledgement, quick, almost apologetic gestures. Others hurried past, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the floor tiles. A few, the ones who had spread rumors during her absence, turned away completely, their faces tight with shame. Maya, her former best friend, stood at her locker down the hall. Their eyes met briefly. Maya opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, turning away. The silence between them spoke volumes about trust broken and bridges still too fragile to cross. The morning passed in a blur of routine: calculus, English literature, chemistry. Each teacher treated her normally, professionally, though Naomi noticed how they sometimes watched her when they thought she wasn't looking. Their gazes held a mixture of curiosity and concern, perhaps wondering how someone so young could have endured what she had. When 6th period government class began, Naomi took her usual seat near the window. Mr. Patterson, a veteran teacher with graying temples and wire-rimmed glasses, stood at the front of the room. He cleared his throat, commanding attention from the class of restless seniors. "Today," he began, "we're discussing recent developments in our judicial system, specifically the silent docket scandal that's been making headlines." The room grew quiet. Several students glanced nervously in Naomi's direction, but she kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral. Her hands remained still on her desk, though her heart beat a little faster. Mr. Patterson continued, "The practice of expediting certain cases through the system without proper oversight has raised serious questions about equal protection under the law. The implications for civil rights and due process are significant." He went on to outline the basics, how the program had operated, the demographics affected, the officials involved. His tone was measured, academic. He didn't mention that one of his own students had been at the center of it all. Naomi listened silently. She could have spoken up, could have told them what it felt like to sit in that cold courtroom, to face a system designed to make her disappear. But she didn't. Instead, she took notes carefully, methodically, as if this were just another lesson about something that had happened to someone else. When class ended, students filed out quickly, the usual chatter subdued. Naomi stayed behind, waiting until the room was empty. From her bag, she pulled out a carefully prepared document, pages of research she'd compiled over the past weeks. The names of other victims, their stories, their outcomes. Some, like her, had been saved by last-minute intervention. Others, like Elijah Wells, hadn't been so fortunate. She placed the document on Mr. Patterson's desk along with a simple note: "These names matter too." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., James Talcott stood before a podium in a crowded press room. Camera flashes punctuated the air as he delivered his resignation speech. His voice was steady, his manner composed, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper. Perhaps regret, perhaps purpose. "After careful consideration," he said, "I am stepping down from my position as Attorney General. The recent revelations regarding the silent docket program have made it clear that oversight failures occurred under my administration. While these policies predated my tenure, I bear responsibility for their continuation." He paused, adjusting his tie slightly. Sometimes justice isn't blind. Sometimes it looks away. And sometimes, if we're lucky, someone makes it look back. He didn't mention Naomi by name. Didn't need to. The press would connect the dots, but her privacy remained protected. It was the least he could do. That evening, Naomi sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop balanced on her knees. The news sites were full of headlines about James's resignation, but she wasn't reading those. Instead, she had multiple college application tabs open, each displaying similar essay prompts. The one before her now read, "Tell us about a moment that changed you." The cursor blinked steadily on the empty document. Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't type. How could she condense these past months into a neat essay? How could she explain what it felt like to face erasure and emerge visible? The wall across from her bed held Elijah's note, still pinned where she'd placed it weeks ago. Below it now hung other things, newspaper clippings about the scandal, letters from families of other victims, a copy of her case dismissal, a timeline of truth coming to light. She leaned back against her headboard, letting out a long breath. The evening light filtered through her window, casting warm shadows across her room. For the first time in months, her shoulders felt truly loose, her breathing easy. And then something unexpected happened. The corners of her mouth turned up just slightly. Not a big smile, not a dramatic gesture, just a small, quiet acknowledgement of survival, of strength, of change. The cursor continued to blink, waiting for words that would come when she was ready. If you enjoyed the story of Naomi, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.